Hey Islanders, this is Hana, and welcome back to my island. Have you seen The East Palace? It's the new Netflix original that came out a few days ago. Right now on Netflix Global chart for non-English shows, it sits at number 2. Only Agent Kim Reactivated, another K-drama, is ahead of it. I've noticed real buzz around this show from friends outside Korea too. So for this video, I wanted to look at the East Palace through the eyes of someone who didn't grow up with this word. What does this story feel like if the belief behind it are brand new to you? One quick warning, there are spoilers ahead for the East Palace. Okay, let's get into it. There's a certain kind of story Koreans call good to read at night. Nam Ju-hyuk, who plays the lead, described the script for the East Palace that way. He said he read 2 pages, found it so gripping he had to put it down, then picked it right back up and read straight through 4 episodes in one sitting. I understand that phrase a little differently. A story that's good to read at night is one you can read in the dark, under the covers, without it feeling foreign to you. For Koreans, that's just what ghost stories are. Frightening, but familiar. And a ghost grief usually makes you sad more than scared. The East Palace is set inside the Joseon royal court, the most dazzling and most closed-up space in Korean history. Through the eyes of a man named Kuchon, who can cross into the world of ghosts, that glittering palace turns out to have another world layered right underneath it. A world haunted by restless spirits and curses. Kuchon can see both worlds at once, and he cuts down ghosts with his sword. Beside him is a court lady named Saeng, who can hear the voices of the dead. Fun fact, her name literally means ginger in Korean. Saeng is ginger. Called on by the king, the two of them set out to uncover a curse hanging over the palace. Netflix labels this show a mystery occult period drama. It has already hit number 1 in Korea and Thailand and climbed to number 2 on the global chart, closing in on the top spot. Watching it, I kept coming back to one question. Koreans have this whole way of seeing death and the soul. It's so familiar to us that we don't even notice how strange it might look from the outside. So how does this land for Western viewers who've never held this worldview at all? Watching the East Palace, a few other shows come to mind. The Joseon era setting recalls Kingdom. The structure of 2 overlapping worlds recall Strange Things. And the Korean afterlife it depicts recall K-pop Demon Hunters. That comparison isn't wrong. But it's exactly when you set the East Palace next to Stranger Things that its real charm comes into focus. The upside down, that flip over world in Stranger Things is something the show invented. As you watch, you learn the rules of that world and you accept them only for as long as you are watching. Once the show ends, that world closes too. The ghost world in the East Palace isn't invented, it's discovered. Shamanism in Korea is known as Musok. It's a belief system that was already running in the background of Korean life long before this show existed, and is still active in corners of Korean society today. So the way Korean viewers accept this world is different. Watching the Upside Down, we are learning strange new rules. But when Kuchon crosses into the ghost world, a Korean viewer is really just recognizing something already written into our body. Holding ancestral rites, performing shamanic ceremonies called gut, entangling a spirit's grief. These are all familiar ideas in Korean society. So this setup doesn't read like invented fantasy. It reads like a dramatized version of an old Korean reality. So I would gently push back on calling this a mystery occult period drama. A mystery is a genre where the whole engine of the story is the search for an answer to who and why. Once that answer comes out, the story is basically done. In the East Palace, tracking down the curse is really just the skeleton that pushes the plot forward. The real center of gravity sits somewhere else. In the ghost world itself, in its rules and its inhabitant, and in the feelings and desires of the characters tangled up in it. Mystery is a game of question and answer. Fantasy is a genre that lets you experience an entire world. Maybe what grips viewers in this show isn't the hunt for whoever cast the curse. Maybe it's the texture of the ghost world and the relationships and emotions inside it. If so, fantasy, occult, period drama might just be the more accurate label. In the East Palace, mystery is really just a functional device that organizes the fantasy underneath it. Why doesn't it feel strange to Koreans that the living and the dead share the same space in this show? I think it's because that's simply how we see death and the soul to begin with. The Western afterlife is largely a binary. Redeemed souls go to heaven. Condemned souls become demons and go to hell. The dead are exiled from the world of the living. Korea doesn't work that way. Not every dead soul is a demon. The dead are still thought to live alongside the living, just in a different kind of relationship. In Korean shamanism, dead souls generally split into two paths. There are ancestral spirits who receive rites and holiday ceremonies and staying in an ongoing, settled relationship with the living. And there are wongi, restless spirits wandering in limbo, unable to let go of their grief. The name cheon itself points at this restless, wandering state. And it's the wongi that this show is really about. But even these restless spirits are not evil by nature. They became grief-stricken through their relationships and their history. And if that grief gets resolved, what Koreans call Haewon, the soul moves on to a good place. It stops harming the living. This worldview is exactly why Korean ghost stories are so rich and varied. The spirits in our folktales don't collapse into one single category. There's the grief-stricken virgin ghost who died unjustly, the water ghost who drowned and tried to pull others in after her, and Kwime, beings that are not born from a dead person at all. They form when bad energy pulls in one place for a long time and rots and festers. Every one of these has its own origin story and its own way of being handled. The writers of the East Palace, Kwon So-ra and Seo Jae-won, clearly understood this. They have said that Korean folklore and oral tradition hold a huge number of these kwime. They picked the ones whose abilities would serve the story and adapted some of their traits to fit the show. This isn't adapted from an existing webtoon or novel. It's a world built fresh out of old folk tales that have been passed down by word of mouth across this land for generations. Where Western fantasy has to invent roles that don't exist yet, Korean creators pull ingredients straight out of an already full storehouse of traditional folklore. That storehouse is so rich, I think, because this is a culture that never exiled the dead from the world of the living. Instead, it kept them close and remembered their stories one by one. Why does difference matter? Because the Western demon is an evil to be defeated. The Korean wongi is a story that needs to be comforted and released. I said something similar when I talked about K-pop demon hunters. Koreans don't really think of Jinwoo, the character in the film, as that. We think of him as having resolved his grief and moved on to a good place. That's why beings like Kuchan's ghost or Jinwoo in K-pop demon hunters feel sad to us more than they feel scary. We don't put them in the category of evil. We see them as an unfinished human relationship. Cutting down a ghost in this world actually means cutting its grip loose and setting it free. That's probably why Guchun's soul fights feel less like a thrilling release and more like something mournful and tender. And none of this worldview is stuck in a museum as some relic of the past. In 21st century Korea, shamanic belief and folk ritual are still genuinely alive. Korean people still check the calendar for a day free of bad spirits before they move house. They still consult a fortune teller before a big decision. They still hold a small ritual called kosa when they start a new business. Most of these people wouldn't call themselves shamanists, but the behavior itself is already operating inside this worldview. A society's worldview gets baked into its language. You can see it in the phrases Koreans throw around without even thinking. What sin did I commit in my past life? I think my ancestors are angry with me. I must have the grief tied up in my appetite. These are metaphors. There are sentences that only make grammatical sense if we already accept ancestors and past lives as real, existing background. In English, you might say something like, I'm obsessed with food, treating it as a private psychological state. Korean instead reaches for a whole cosmic backdrop, past lives, and unresolved grief to explain the exact same feeling. The Korean word for indigestion is interesting too. Rather than treating it as a passing bodily process, it's described as something getting caught and blocked inside the body. That way of talking comes from a worldview that ties the body, one's vital energy, and spiritual circulation into a single system. Phrases like their energy is strong, the yin energy here is heavy, or this place feels gloomy work the same way. We describe the atmosphere of a space as a real physical current of energy. In English, you might describe a room's mood as an eerie feeling, something purely psychological. In Korean, we describe it using ki, an energy that's treated as genuinely real. This same idea, ki, runs through Korean medicine theory of energy circulation. It also runs through traditional Korean feng shui and the spiritual power a shaman is said to receive. It's all one connected worldview. We say, I have a hunch, or something feels off, and then actually change their plans because of it. That's a habit of trusting a kind of intuitive knowing as a valid basis for a decision, separate from logic. And there's even more basic evidence fluttering in plain sight every day. The Korean flag. The taeguk symbol at its center is the harmony of yin and yang. The four trigrams in its corners represent the balance of heaven and earth, water and fire. A nation's own flag is built directly on top of this yin and yang worldview. So the ghost world that the East Palace depicts isn't some especially strange invention. From the national flag to everyday speech to feng shui and fortune telling, it's just a one small piece of a much larger, consistent system of symbols. It's dramatized here through restless spirits and resolved grief. We don't feel any friction watching this show, and it's not because we are good at suspending disbelief. It's because the story simply moved the logic that was already lurking inside our everyday speech onto the screen. So, how does a worldview, this specifically Korean, reach a global audience? Here is a distinction I think matters. A local feeling doesn't travel globally because the worldview itself convinces people. It travels because the acting, direction, costumes, period details, music, and visual language all fuse together. The fusion is a level of craft that lowers the barrier to entry. It isn't hard to win over a Western audience with a story they already know. What's hard is the opposite, holding on to an unfamiliar worldview while still winning over an unfamiliar audience. That's what makes Korean drama remarkable. It doesn't dilute its worldview to make it easier for Western viewers to follow. Instead, it wraps a genuinely hard to grasp worldview in overwhelming craft and gets you watching first. It's not a strategy of making the emotion universal. It's a strategy of keeping the local feeling fully intact and using technical polish to carry the audience across the threshold anyway. To be clear, Korea didn't invent this strategy. The Indian film RRR, Rise, Roar, Revolt, held on to myth and a national story that Western audiences knew nothing about. It still drove a worldwide box office hit through pure action and music. Japanese animation has done something similar. It dropped Shinto belief and its particular view of death on screen with no explanation and holds audiences through the sheer density of its art and direction. Staying local while persuading through form is a path several cultures have each found in their own way. Even so, what makes Korea distinct is how dense and how fast that success is, and above all, how repeatable it's become. Where RRR and Japanese animation each build devoted fandoms, Korean content keeps producing short, explosive global waves of interest. It's almost like an industrial formula it can reproduce again and again. The numbers back this up. Squid Game Season 1 set Netflix's all-time record for a series. K-pop Demon Hunters then broke that record, becoming the most watched thing Netflix has ever released, series and films combined. Netflix's all-time number one series and its all-time number one film are both side-by-side projects built on Korean material. The K-pop Demon Hunters soundtrack even sent several songs onto the Billboard Hot 100 at the same time. Korea's population is around 50 million, and this is a country whose peninsula is still cut in half. It was colonized. It fought a war where the same people turned guns on each other. At one point, it was among the poorest countries in the world. In a little over half a century, that same country built both a top 10 global economy and a major cultural export power at the same time. On top of that, Korean is a language spoken as a native tongue only on this one peninsula. That's a completely different starting point from languages like English or Spanish, which spread across continents through colonial expansion. If there is a comparable case, it might be Sweden. People marvel that ABBA and Spotify came out of a Swedish-speaking population of roughly 10 million. Korea's population is maybe 5 times larger, but it's still a minor language on the world stage. And it did this on top of a far rougher history, war, division, and compressed growth. What's striking is that this achievement can't be explained just by a country size or economic weight. Countries with bigger populations and bigger markets than Korea haven't produced anything close to this kind of cultural reach. So Korea's case isn't simply the natural result of a rising national power. It looks more like something that erupted when a dense, difficult history collided with a real industrial polish. The narrative density built up by that compressed suffering. The emotional resources of Han and Haewon, grief and its release of class and desire, of survivor and dignity. The worldview around the death and restless spirits that we talked about earlier is really just one branch of the same emotional inheritance. Now, let's come back to the texture of the show itself. I really love the way the East Palace looks. It has a slightly dark, high contrast, heavy tone. That wasn't an accident. It was designed. Director Choi Jung has said he deliberately gave the real world and ghost world different color palettes and backgrounds. That was to keep the two visually distinct. The real world is cool and blue. The ghost world, thick with restless spirits, is red and desolate. That's also why it makes sense that they placed a cute mascot ghost called Gomoksari inside all this heavy, dark imagery. Cutting a small breathing hole into a serious tragedy is the same wisdom behind pansori, traditional Korean narrative singing. Pansori builds up grief in a slow rhythm before releasing it in a fast one. If a story stays heavy the whole way through, the audience gets worn out. A little bit of laughter actually makes the sadness land harder. This mascot, Gomoksari, is worth a closer look. With huge round eyes, a jet black round body, and stubby little limbs, this creature was nicknamed Joseon Groot the moment it appeared. Fans started asking for merchandise and plush toys. But this adorable mascot wasn't invented out of nowhere either. It's rooted in an actual piece of oral folklore, a pitch black creature that jumps out on a mountain path late at night. It chases after people and stubbornly shouts nothing but its own name. But if a person stands their ground and doesn't get scared, the creature backs off. It also vanishes if it can't cross running water. It's an odd, harmless kind of spirit passed down in Korean storytelling. Gomok means pitch black and sari means a living being. The production team took this old black creature and gave it a modern design, bringing it back as a kyume that follows Guchon around like a puppy. It isn't a person who died and became a ghost. It's a kyume that formed from a bad energy pulling for too long. And despite its cute look, it has a habit of draining human vital energy. There's a scene where Kamoksari gets hurt, and Kuchan offers it his own finger, sharing a bit of his own vital energy. After that, the creature never leaves his side. Handling even a grief-stricken being with warmth instead of fear, that might be the most lovable example of the whole Korean idea of Haewon. That's resolving grief, something we talked about earlier. Even a mascot carries this worldview inside it. The palace sets, the traditional dress, the props, and the architecture are also said to draw heavily from real Korean tradition. The director has said he wanted to showcase the traditional beauty of the palace buildings and the costumes in every single shot. You can feel that intention all over the screen. The scenes that lovingly recreate Joseon era clothing and props hold your eyes on their own apart from anything happening in the story. The music especially is stunning. It takes traditional Korean music and reinterprets it in a modern register. It pulls out a feeling that's both thrilling and grief-stricken at once, mournful and sorrowful. The secret is in the dual arrangement. At the core sits a full orchestral sound, a European orchestra paired with Korean string players. Layered on top of that are traditional Korean instruments, the kind you'd hear in a folk ensemble rather than a concert hall. Even the track titles lean hard into shamanism and the occult, with names like exorcism rhythm. The track in particular brings in a full lineup of traditional percussion, the same kind of instruments used in a rare Korean shamanic ritual called gut. They essentially lifted the instrumental setup of a real shamanic ceremony straight onto the screen. That sense I felt of thrill and grief coexisting at once came directly from this meeting between a Western orchestra and a Korean gut ritual. The acting deserves real credit too. Among younger actors working today, I think it's genuinely hard to find the performers with the diction and delivery of Nam Joo-hyuk and No Yoon-suk. Their emotional range is just as rare. Nam Joo-hyuk in particular is making this his first project back after military service. He kept training at an action school both before and during filming to get ready. Looking at Nam Joo-hyuk's face in this role, I see traces of Kim Ne-won and Yoo Ah-in at their peak. It's a face that can hold both clarity and shadow at once. You can feel how much genuine care he put into both the acting and the action as he prepared for his comeback role. The tonal contrast between the two leads is carefully built too. Kuchan, worn down from constantly hunting ghosts and drained of his vital energy, comes across as a little slumped, a little listless. Nam Joo-hyuk himself has described Kuchan as someone who's kept his distance from the world, carrying an inner wound he doesn't easily show. Saeng, by contrast, has a fierce will to live. She is assertive and brave. No Yoon-seo trained in horseback riding and swordsmanship for the role. She said she built the character around how differently Saeng behaves in front of the king versus in front of Kuchan. Inside this dark fantasy, she carves out her own version of a woman who acts on her own terms. Even facing off one-on-one against a veteran like Cho Sung-woo, she's not overshadowed at all. And the real backbone of this show is Cho Sung-woo and Jang Yong-nam. Both are always excellent, but here their range stands out even more than usual. The king Jo Sung-woo plays looks at times like a man terrified of a curse. At other times, his face gives nothing away about whether he might be using the same curse for power. With a single expression sitting on the fence between good and evil, he proves something. The desires of a living human being are more frightening than any restless spirits wandering the palace. That weight, carrying both the burden of absolute power and its guilt at the same time, anchors the whole show's center of gravity. Jang Yong-nam, playing the Queen Dowager, works on a different level entirely. She conveys 30 plus years passing using nothing but the tone of her voice and the texture of her gaze. It's magnetic enough to pull focus from everything else on screen. These veteran actors can carry the full weight of a classic period piece. They keep the show grounded every time the fantasy threatens to feel too light. If the two young leads are the face of this new genre, these two are the bone structure holding that face up. There's a certain kind of story Koreans call good to read at night. Squid Game won the world over through the emotion of class. Parasite won it over through the feel of class. The East Palace is betting on something else entirely. Existence itself. It's asking a much more fundamental question. How do the living and the dead relate to each other? That's exactly why this show's challenge is harder and exactly why it's more interesting. Koreans aren't afraid of ghosts. More precisely, we are afraid of them, but we don't hate them. Instead of banishing the dead, we keep them close and try to resolve their grief. To cut down a ghost, in this world, really means to embrace it. To chase off a restless spirit really means to send it off with care, sending off what leaves and welcoming what arrives with real care. Maybe that's exactly how this peninsula went through so much hardship and never fully broke, turning grief into song and story instead of letting curdle into resentment. I can't promise you the East Palace will hit #1 worldwide. Nobody knows what happens from here. But regardless of ranking, one thing is already clear. This show took the way Koreans see the world, this old way of relating to death and the soul. It dressed that in polished, modern craft and offered it to a global audience. How far the feeling travels, I'll be watching quietly to find out. So, what did you think? I'd love to know how you personally saw the East Palace. Islanders, tell me your own take, your own angle on it. If this video resonated with you, show your support with a like and a subscribe. You can also support my channel through membership. It's been Hana's Island. This is a safe place for you. Until we meet again, stay comfortable on the island at your own latitude. Take care. Bye.